The envelope arrived on a Thursday morning in the mail, white and standard-sized, with my name handwritten on the front in careful block letters, no return address, just my name and the street address of our home in a suburb of Denver, Colorado. I almost did not open it because I receive mail addressed to me all the time, bills and advertisements, and occasionally personal letters from friends, and I was in the middle of making lunch for my daughter Emma, who was home from school with a cold, and who needed soup and something to settle her stomach before she went back to bed for the afternoon. But something about the handwriting made me pause. Something about the deliberate neatness of it, the way someone writes when they are writing something important that they do not want to be misunderstood, and I opened it. Inside was a letter, several pages, written on cream-colored paper in the same careful handwriting, and a photograph printed on regular copy paper of my husband David, with a woman I had never seen before, both of them in what looked like a hotel room. The photograph clearly taken by neither of them, which meant someone else had been present or had access to the room. And I stood in my kitchen with a can of soup in one hand and the letter in the other, and I read the opening lines which said, "My name is Stephanie, and I am writing to you about David, because I cannot stay silent anymore, and I think you deserve to know the truth about the man you married." My husband David worked as a partner at a law firm in downtown Denver. We had been married for 13 years. We lived in a 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood called Cherry Creek with our 2 children, Emma, who was 12, and Thomas, who was 9, and our lives had the shape and structure of lives that people spend years building carefully. The right schools, the right neighborhood, the right investments, the kind of life that looks from the outside like it is constructed on solid ground. David was successful. He traveled frequently for work, maybe 2 weeks out of every month, and I had never questioned those travels because successful lawyers travel. That is simply part of what successful lawyers do, and I had organized my own life around his travel schedule, the way women organize their lives around the schedules of men who have careers that matter, making sure the children got to school, making sure dinner was handled, making sure everything continued exactly as it had been continuing while he was away. The letter continued. Stephanie said she had worked as David's secretary for 5 years. She said she had started the job thinking it was simply an administrative position, and had slowly realized that David was conducting a second life from his office, that he spent time in hotel rooms during what he said were business trips, but that she knew were not business trips because she had booked many of his actual business trips, and she knew what those looked like, that he had a separate phone that he kept in his desk drawer at the office, that he had a separate credit card that appeared on no statement she had ever seen, that she had watched him take calls from a woman whose name was never the same twice, that she had opened a few of his emails by accident and had seen messages that could not possibly be from clients or colleagues. Messages that contained words that made it clear he was building a second relationship alongside his first one. Stephanie said she had written this letter because she could not continue being complicit in the deception by saying nothing, because she had a daughter the same age as Emma, and she could not imagine putting her daughter in a position where her life was built on a lie, because she had tried to talk to David about it, and he had told her it was none of her business, and that if she ever mentioned it to anyone he would destroy her professionally, and because she had decided that she valued her conscience more than she valued keeping her job. I put the letter down on the kitchen counter, and I called Emma, and I told her I had changed my mind about lunch, that she should have crackers and ginger ale instead, that I needed to take care of something, and she said, "Okay, Mom," and went back upstairs. And I sat down at the kitchen table, and I read the entire letter from beginning to end. Stephanie wrote about a woman named Nicole, who she believed David had been seeing for approximately 4 years. She wrote that the relationship appeared to have started as something casual, but had developed into something more stable and ongoing. She wrote that she had found hotel reservations on David's calendar that corresponded with trips he had told me were for work conferences or client meetings. She wrote that she had overheard a phone conversation in which David had told Nicole that he was working on getting out of his marriage, but that it was complicated because he had children and significant financial entanglements. She wrote that she had found photographs on David's work computer, in a folder that was password protected, but which she had accessed one time when David had stepped away from his desk, photographs of David and Nicole together at restaurants and at a beach, and at what looked like a cabin somewhere in the mountains. She wrote that she was giving me this information because she thought I deserved to know, and because she was quitting her job and moving to another city, and she did not want to leave without doing one thing that she thought was right, which was telling me the truth about the man I had married. She wrote that she understood this would cause me pain, and that she was sorry about that, but that she thought living in a lie caused more pain in the long run than knowing the truth did. She signed the letter with her full name and a phone number, and she wrote, "Please call me if you want to talk. I am prepared to answer any questions and to provide documentation if you need it." I sat in my kitchen for a very long time with that letter in my hands. I looked at the photograph again. I studied David's face in it, trying to see in that face something that explained how a person could build two separate lives simultaneously with this degree of commitment and intentionality. The woman in the photograph was pretty in the conventional way that women in photographs taken in hotel rooms are often pretty. Blonde hair, thin frame, the kind of attractiveness that photographs well and that does not require much context to understand. She was looking at David with an expression that I recognized, because I had seen David look at me that way once, in the early years of our marriage, with a warmth and attention that suggested the person looking at him was the only person in the world who mattered. I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat with it, and I thought about what I was supposed to do with this information. I could confront David immediately. I could hire an attorney without telling him anything. I could call Stephanie and ask her questions. I could sit with this for a day or a week or a month and figure out what I actually wanted the outcome of this situation to be. I could do nothing and live with this knowledge privately. Each option had different consequences and different implications, and I did not know yet which one was the right one, so I decided to do what I had been trained by 13 years of marriage to do, which was to manage the situation quietly and figure out what David wanted before I did anything that would disrupt the surface of our lives. I called Stephanie. She answered on the second ring as though she was expecting the call, and I said, "My name is Jennifer, and I received your letter, and I need to know whether any of what you wrote is true, or whether someone is playing a terrible prank on me." Stephanie said, "I am very sorry, but everything I wrote is true, and I can provide you with documentation if you need it. Hotel reservations, credit card statements, photographs, emails, whatever you need to see to believe me." I said, "Why did you do this? Why did you not just keep quiet?" And Stephanie said, "Because I have a daughter, and I could not imagine being the person who knew that another woman's children were living in a lie, and did nothing to tell her about it." And I said, "Okay, I believe you." I did not tell David I knew. I went about the next day the way I always did. I made breakfast and drove Emma to school and picked her up from school and made dinner and helped Thomas with his homework and put them both to bed and lay next to David in our bed while he scrolled through his phone, not knowing that I knew what was on that phone, or at least knowing that there was another phone somewhere, another life, another woman who believed that David was working on getting out of his marriage so he could be with her. I did not sleep. I lay in the dark, and I thought about what Stephanie had told me, and I thought about what I wanted to do about it. And I realized that before I could make any decisions, I needed to verify that what she had written was true, that I needed to see the documentation, that I needed to understand the full scope of what David had constructed. I called Stephanie the next morning and arranged to meet her at a coffee shop near her office. I told David I was going to run errands and I would be back in the afternoon, and he said okay and kissed me on the forehead the way he always did before leaving for work, and I felt something shift inside me when he did that. Something that made it harder to maintain the appearance of normalcy, because now that I knew what I knew, his affection felt like performance, his kiss felt like a lie, and I wondered how many times he had kissed me while thinking about Nicole, or while planning his next trip to a hotel, or while making calculations about how long he could sustain both relationships before one of them fell apart. Stephanie was waiting at a corner table with a folder in front of her, and she looked nervous in the way that people look nervous when they are about to do something that they know is the right thing, but that will have consequences they cannot fully predict. I sat down across from her and I said, "Thank you for writing to me," and she said, "I wish I did not have to, but I could not stay quiet anymore." She opened the folder and she showed me. She showed me hotel reservations under David's name at 3 different hotels in Denver going back 4 years. She showed me credit card statements from a card that was registered to a business name I did not recognize that showed regular charges for hotels and restaurants and flights to places I had never heard David mention. She showed me screenshots of text messages between David and someone identified only as N, in which they discussed meeting times, and in which David told N that he was working on extricating himself from his marriage, but that it was complicated because of the children. Stephanie said there is also a Gmail account that David set up 5 years ago. She wrote down the email address and the password which she had managed to photograph when he left his computer unlocked one afternoon. And she said, I do not know if the password still works, but if it does you will find 4 years of correspondence between David and Nicole, and it will show you the full extent of the relationship. I took the piece of paper she handed me, and I looked at it, and I said, why are you giving me this? Why are you taking this risk? And Stephanie said, because my daughter is 12 years old, and she is about to become aware of the fact that her world is built on a lie. And I wanted to make sure that when that happened, when she finally understands, it will be because you told her the truth, and not because David tried to manage the narrative and tell her some version of the story that protects himself. I went home and I called in sick to the volunteer shift I had scheduled for that afternoon. And I told Emma and Thomas that I was not feeling well and was going to rest, and that they should do homework and not bother me. And I went upstairs to the bedroom that David and I shared, and I sat on the bed with my laptop, and I entered the email address and password that Stephanie had given me. The password worked. It opened to a Gmail inbox with thousands of messages going back 5 years, and I started reading. The earliest messages were casual, from 4.5 years ago, messages between David and a woman named Nicole about where to meet and what time and whether David was going to be able to get away from work. The messages gradually became more intimate. They became more frequent. They became messages in which David told Nicole that he loved her, that he had never felt the way he felt about her, that he was trying to figure out how to manage his other life so that he could be with her without destroying everything. He told her he was unhappy in his marriage. He told her he had stayed with me only because of the children. He told her that he was planning to separate from me in the next year or two, but that he needed to be careful about it, that he needed to make sure he had protected his assets, and that he had custody arrangements worked out before he told me that the marriage was over. He told her that he loved his children, but that he also loved her, and that he wanted a life with her, and he was going to find a way to make that happen. I sat on my bed and I read messages that spanned 4 years of my marriage. 4 years during which my husband had been telling me we were building something together, while simultaneously building something completely different with someone else. And I tried to find the moment at which I should have noticed. The moment at which something should have tipped me off. The moment at which this stopped being invisible and started being obvious. But I could not find it because the whole operation had been conducted with a level of care and attention that made it nearly impossible to detect unless someone told you it was happening. I did not confront David that day or the next day. I spent 3 days reading through 4 years of emails and making a list of the facts I needed to understand, the people I needed to talk to, the decisions I needed to make. I called a divorce attorney. I called a therapist. I called Kate, my sister, who listened to the whole story and said, Jen, I am so sorry. This is unforgivable. What do you need from me? And I said, I need you to listen and to help me think through what comes next without judgment. I did not call Nicole. I did not reach out to her. I did not tell David I knew. I simply moved through my days exactly as I had been moving through my days before I received Stephanie's letter, making meals and driving children to school and sleeping next to a man who had constructed an elaborate lie and was apparently planning to dismantle my life without ever giving me the dignity of choosing to leave. It was Emma who made the decision about when I would tell David what I knew. It was a Saturday morning, and Emma came down to breakfast, and she said, Mom, I need to tell you something. And I said, what? And she said, Dad has been taking calls in the garage for like the last month, and he closes the door and talks quietly. And I do not think he knows I can hear him, but I can hear him, and he keeps saying he loves her and that he wishes he was with her, and I do not know what that means, but it sounds bad. I put down the toast I was making, and I said, thank you for telling me. And Emma said, is Dad okay? And I said, no, actually. Dad is not okay. Dad has been doing something that is not okay, and I have known about it for a few days, and I am trying to figure out how to handle it. And Emma said, what did he do? And I said, that is a conversation we need to have as a family, and I need to talk to your father first. But I want you to know that whatever happens, none of this is your fault, and none of this has anything to do with you or Thomas. And Emma said, I know that, but I still do not want him to lie. And I said, I know, and I am going to do everything I can to make sure he stops lying. David came home at 1 o'clock that afternoon, and I told him I needed to talk to him, and I told him to come into the study and close the door. I had printed out selected emails from the Gmail account, enough that he could not deny what was happening, and I laid them on the desk in front of him, and I said, I know about Nicole. I know about the hotel rooms. I know about the email account. I know about the calls you have been taking in the garage. And I know that you have been planning to leave me while pretending to still be married to me and building a relationship with someone else. David's face went pale, and he said, "Who told you this?" And I said, "Someone who works with you, someone who has a conscience." And he said, "That is not right. You should not have been given information about my private life without my knowledge." And I said, "David, you are a lawyer. You understand that what you are doing is deceptive and dishonest. And I am sure you understand that now that I know, things are going to have to change." David said, "I can explain this." And I said, "No, you cannot explain this. There is nothing to explain. You either have been in a relationship with another woman for 4 years while remaining married to me, or you have not, and it is clear from the email account that you have." He said, "I did not mean for any of this to happen." And I said, "That is not true. You meant for all of this to happen. You meant for every single part of it. You chose to create that email account. You chose to book those hotels. You chose to send those messages. You chose to lie to me and to your children every single day." He said, "I need some time to think about this." And I said, "You have had 4 years to think about this. You do not get any more time. You need to decide right now whether you want to fight me on this divorce or cooperate with me and make it as painless as possible for Emma and Thomas. Because if you fight me, I will take every email you sent, every credit card statement, every hotel reservation, and I will present them to a judge, and I will make sure that the judge understands exactly who you are and what you have done." And David looked at me, and something in his face shifted, and he said, "I will cooperate. Whatever you need me to do, I will cooperate." David moved out of the house the following Tuesday. He packed a bag and he left, and he rented an apartment in a building downtown that was the kind of place that temporary divorces move to, small and impersonal and designed for people who were in between lives. I did not tell Emma and Thomas immediately, because I wanted to have more information before I started that conversation, before I told my children that their father had been lying to them for 4 years, and that he was in love with someone else, and that everything they thought was stable was actually built on deception. I told them he was traveling for work, which was the truth in a way, because he was traveling, he was leaving, and I bought myself a week to figure out what I was going to say and how I was going to say it. I called Nicole. I found her phone number in David's email account, and I called her on a Wednesday afternoon, and she answered on the 3rd ring and said hello. And I said, "Is this Nicole?" And she said, "Yes, who is this?" And I said, "This is Jennifer Carver. I am David's wife." And there was a long silence on the other end. And then Nicole said, "I do not know what you are talking about." And I said, "Yes, you do. You have been having a relationship with my husband for 4 years. You have been exchanging emails with him about how much you love him and how you wish you were with him. And you have been meeting with him in hotel rooms while he was telling me he was working late or traveling for business." Nicole said, "Where did you get that information?" And I said, "From the Gmail account that my husband created specifically to communicate with you." And she said, "I need to talk to David about this." And I said, "No, you do not. Because David has agreed to cooperate with me on the divorce. And if he calls you and tells you to deny everything, he is lying again. And I am calling you because I think you deserve to know something about the man you are in love with before you go any further with him, which is that he is a liar, and he is capable of maintaining a complete deception with someone for 4 years, and making them believe he loves them, while simultaneously making his wife and his children believe that he loves them too." Nicole said, "I love David, and I do not believe you." And I said, "I know you believe you love David. But what you love is the version of David that David created specifically for you, the version of David who is attentive and warm, and who tells you that he loves you and who promises you a future together. But David has another version, and that version is the version who lies and who deceives and who stays married to his wife for financial reasons and who uses people to get what he wants. And if you do not believe me, I can send you the emails." Nicole said, "Do not contact me again," and she hung up. I called Stephanie, and I told her that David had moved out, and that I was filing for divorce, and that I wanted her to know that she had done the right thing, that what she had done had made a difference. Stephanie said, "I am so glad you know. I have been so anxious about whether I did the right thing, and whether you would hate me for getting involved. And I said I could never hate you for telling me the truth." And she said, "There is something else I need to tell you. Something I did not put in the letter, because I was not sure about it, but I found out later, and I thought you should know." I said, "What?" And she said David was planning to propose to Nicole. He had already bought the ring. I saw the receipt in his desk, and he was planning to propose to her within the next 6 months. And I said, "Thank you for telling me." I am glad you did. I hired an attorney named Patricia who specialized in high net worth divorces, and who told me that based on the evidence I had, based on the emails and the credit card statements and the hotel reservations, I had a very strong position. She told me that David's conduct, his infidelity, and his attempts to hide assets through the secret credit card would work significantly in my favor in the divorce proceedings. She told me that I could expect to receive a substantial portion of David's income as spousal support, and that I would almost certainly be awarded primary custody of both children. She told me that I should prepare for this to take 6 to 12 months, and that it was likely going to be contentious, even though David had said he would cooperate, because people always said they would cooperate in the beginning, and then changed their minds when they understood what cooperation actually meant. I told Emma and Thomas the following Friday. I sat them down in the living room and I told them that their father and I had decided that we could not be married to each other anymore, that this was a decision that we had made together, which was a lie, but it was the kind of lie that parents tell to protect their children from the messiest parts of adult reality. Emma said, "Is Dad in love with someone else?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I know. I have known for a while. I just did not know how to tell you." Thomas said, "Will we still see Dad?" And I said, "Yes. You will spend time with him. That is not going to change. What is changing is that your dad and I will not be living in the same house anymore." Emma said, "Will you be okay?" And I said, "I will be. It is going to be hard for a while, but I will be okay. And I need you both to know that this is not your fault, and it is not about anything you did or did not do. This is about choices that your father made, and I am handling it." The divorce proceedings began in earnest the following month. Patricia filed the paperwork and listed all the grounds for the divorce, and included copies of the email correspondence and the credit card statements as evidence of infidelity. David's attorney, a woman named Sandra who had a reputation for being aggressive, immediately filed a motion to have the evidence excluded on the basis that it had been obtained without David's knowledge or consent, essentially arguing that I had hacked his email account and that doing so had violated his privacy, and therefore the evidence should not be admissible. Patricia filed a response arguing that the evidence was admissible because I had been provided the password voluntarily by someone with legitimate access to the account, and that I was entitled to review evidence of marital infidelity, and the judge ruled in Patricia's favor and allowed the evidence to be entered into the record. David's cooperation lasted approximately 6 weeks. After that, once he realized the full extent of what the evidence was going to cost him, he stopped being cooperative and started being contentious. He disputed the amount of spousal support. He disputed the amount of child support. He disputed custody arrangements. He disputed the division of assets. He fought on every single point, as though there was a version of this situation in which he could emerge without having to face the consequences of 4 years of infidelity and deception. And I watched from across the conference table in Patricia's office as my husband of 13 years became a person I did not recognize, someone focused entirely on preserving his own interests without regard for how his actions affected his children or affected me. Stephanie contacted me in the middle of all of this. She had moved to Seattle, and she had found a new job, and she wanted me to know that she was doing well and that she did not regret what she had done. She said, "I have been following the case through social media, and I see that David is being difficult, and I want you to know that what you are experiencing is exactly what I was worried about, which is that people like David, people who have gotten good at lying, do not simply stop lying when they are caught. They just lie more aggressively and with more conviction." She said, "I have something else that might help you if you want it." And I said, "What?" And she said, "I kept some additional documentation that I did not put in the original letter because I was not sure you would need it. But if David is being contentious, it might be useful." She sent me photographs. Photographs of David with Nicole at a cabin in the mountains that I would later learn David owned and had purchased 5 years ago without telling me. A cabin he had apparently been using as a place to meet Nicole away from the city where they might be recognized. The photographs showed them kissing, embracing, lying together in bed, the kind of intimate moments that are only captured when someone is there to capture them. And I looked at those photographs and I understood that Stephanie had documented this entire relationship with a precision that suggested she had been building a case against David for years, preparing evidence in case she ever needed it, ever needed to tell someone the truth about what she had observed. I asked Patricia whether these photographs would be admissible, and Patricia said probably not, because they were taken without consent in what might be considered a private space. But she said she could show them to David, and let him know that I had them. And sometimes that kind of pressure is enough to make people more willing to negotiate. Patricia showed David the photographs, and David's entire demeanor changed. He went from fighting every single point to suddenly being willing to settle, to accepting the spousal support amount I wanted, to accepting the custody arrangement I proposed, to accepting the division of assets with minimal argument. The divorce was finalized 8 months after the initial filing. I received the house, which had significant equity that David fought hard to keep, but which Patricia managed to secure for me as part of the settlement. I received substantial monthly spousal support that would continue for 5 years and then decrease. I received primary custody of both Emma and Thomas, with David receiving them every other weekend and 2 weeks in the summer. I received the proceeds from David's retirement account minus his legal fees. I received everything that I was entitled to receive under the law, and I understood, watching David sign the final documents, that he had not actually wanted to fight for any of it, that he had only been fighting because he thought he could win, and once he realized he could not, he had simply surrendered. Nicole called me 6 months after the divorce was finalized. She said she had things she wanted me to know about David, and I said, I do not think that is a good idea, and she said, please, just listen for a moment, and I said, okay, and she said David left me. He said he was not ready for a commitment, and that he needed time to figure things out, and he said he was sorry for misleading me, but that he could not be the person I needed him to be. I did not say anything, and Nicole said, I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what you were trying to tell me on the phone that day. And I said, I am sorry that happened to you, and she said, I just wanted you to know that I believe you now. I did not hear from David for almost a year after the divorce was finalized. Then one day he called and he asked if he could speak with me, and I said about what? And he said about everything. I want to apologize, I want to explain, I want you to understand why I did what I did. I said, David, I do not care why you did it. I care that you did it. That is all that matters. And he said, I know, but I just need you to hear me out. I did some therapy and I am trying to understand myself better, and I think it would be good for me to explain this to you. I said, no, I do not think that would be good for you. I think that would be good for you, and I am not interested in being good for you anymore. I have Emma and Thomas, I have my house, I have my life, and you are no longer part of any of those things except as required for the co-parenting arrangements we have, so no. I will not sit down and listen to your explanation. I will not give you the opportunity to manage the narrative and make yourself feel better about what you did by getting my forgiveness. I hung up, and I did not answer when he called back. Emma told me a few months later that her father had asked her if he could come talk to her and her brother about the divorce and about the choices he had made. And I said that was up to her and Thomas, that she was old enough to make her own decision about whether she wanted to hear from him. And she said she was going to let him come, but she also said she wanted me to know that she had read the emails, that Stephanie had shown them to her, that Emma wanted to understand what had happened. And she said, Mom, I just want you to know that I do not believe Dad when he says he made a mistake, or that he is sorry. I think he is sorry he got caught, and that is different. I said, yes, that is different. And I am glad you can see that distinction, because that is an important one, and that will serve you well in your life. Thomas was more forgiving than Emma. He let David explain, and he seemed to believe that David genuinely regretted what he had done, and wanted to be a better person going forward. And I did not tell Thomas that he was wrong to believe that, because I think children need to believe that the people who create them are capable of growth and change. But I also made sure that Thomas understood that forgiveness and trust are not the same thing, that you can forgive someone and still maintain boundaries, that you can love someone and still be careful about how much access you give them to your vulnerability. I did not hear from Nicole again after that one phone call. I assume she moved on, found someone else, built a different life, and I have compassion for her because I understand now that she was also a victim of David's deception, even though she believed she was not, even though she believed she was a willing participant in something real. She was not. She was a willing participant in a lie that David constructed so carefully that she could not see through it. And that is a terrible thing to discover about yourself, that you have been fooled that completely by someone you trusted. Stephanie wrote me a letter 2 years after she had sent the first one. She said she wanted me to know that she had followed my life since the divorce, that she had seen that I was okay, that the children were okay, that I had rebuilt something good from the destruction that David had caused. She said she had wanted to tell me that she had no regrets about what she had done, and that she thought about my situation sometimes, and was glad that she had chosen to tell the truth instead of staying silent. She said she had also learned something from the experience, which was that sometimes doing the right thing means involving yourself in someone else's life in ways that are uncomfortable and that might have consequences, but that the consequences are worth it because truth is worth it, and that she hoped I understood that everything she had done, every risk she had taken, had been because she believed that I and my children deserved to know the reality of the situation we were living in instead of being deceived. I wrote her back and I told her that I was grateful for what she had done, and that I thought about her sometimes too, and that I hoped her life in Seattle was everything she wanted it to be. I told her that what she had done had changed everything for my family, that it had prevented me from making decisions based on false information, that it had protected my children from years of lies and deception, and that I would never be able to repay that debt, but that I would never stop being grateful for it. 5 years after the divorce was finalized, I was in a grocery store and I saw David in the checkout line with a woman I did not recognize. He was smiling at her the same way he had smiled at Nicole and the same way he had smiled at me, and I thought about what Stephanie had written in her letter, about the importance of truth, and I realized that the woman in the checkout line probably did not know that David had a pattern, that this was probably not the first time he had constructed a warm and attentive version of himself for someone new, that the only difference between her situation and mine and Nicole's situation was that she simply had not discovered it yet. I did not approach them. I did not say anything. I simply paid for my groceries and left. I think about David sometimes, not with anger anymore, but with a kind of sad recognition that there are people in the world who are built in a way that makes it difficult for them to be honest, that makes lying easier than truth, that makes maintaining deception feel safer than vulnerability. I think about what his therapy has or has not done for him, whether he has actually changed or whether he is simply more careful now about who he deceives and how. I think about the next woman and the woman after that, and I hope that one of them will have a Stephanie in their life, someone who sees what is happening and decides that telling the truth is more important than staying silent. If you are listening to this and something about it feels familiar, if you are wondering whether the person you are with is telling you everything, if you have noticed small inconsistencies that you have been explaining away or rationalizing, I want you to know that your instinct is probably right. I want you to know that people who are good at lying are good at it because they have practiced, because they have built systems that support the deception, because they have learned how to compartmentalize in ways that allow them to maintain multiple stories simultaneously. I want you to know that you do not have to wait for someone else to tell you the truth before you start looking for it yourself. You do not have to be a victim of someone else's deception. You can ask questions and you can demand answers, and you can choose not to accept easy explanations for things that do not add up. And I want you to know that if you are a Stephanie, if you are someone who knows something about someone else's relationship that you think they should know, I want you to know that telling them might be the most important thing you ever do. That the risk of being involved is worth the risk of telling the truth, that there are women and children out there who are living in deception because the people around them chose to stay silent. And if you can change that, if you can be the person who says what needs to be said, then you should do it, because truth matters and so do the people who are being lied to. Leave me a comment and tell me, would you want to know if you were being deceived, or would you rather live in a comfortable lie? I genuinely want to know, because I have thought about that question every day since I learned the truth, and I still do not know if I would have chosen to know if I had the choice. And if you are new here, subscribe and turn on notifications because there are more stories coming, and every single one of them belongs to a woman who had to decide whether the truth was worth the cost of knowing it, and discovered that it always is. I will see you in the next one.